Give me 15 minutes and I'll destroy your brain fog forever. You know that feeling when you sit down to work and your brain feels like it's turned off and simple tasks feel impossible to do. You can't think clearly no matter how much coffee you drink. What nobody tells you is that while you're struggling through another unproductive, foggy day, there are entrepreneurs out there making millions simply because they've learned how to achieve mental sharpness, which 99% of people completely ignore. And look, I've studied the daily routines of the world's sharpest minds, from Silicon Valley CEOs to world-class athletes, and they all follow the same underlying principles that most people are doing the exact opposite of, which is why they're stuck in a repeated cycle of mental fatigue and brain fog. You've probably tried everything from nootropics, more sleep, cutting caffeine, and meditation, but you're still waking up feeling mentally sluggish. This is because you're missing the foundation that makes everything else work. And what's crazy is that there's a stupidly simple approach that can eliminate brain fog in as little as 48 hours. And when you get this dialed in correctly, your brain fog disappears and mental clarity becomes your default state. So in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to break down exactly what's causing your brain fog and show you how to destroy it forever so you can finally think clearly and perform at your peak without relying on stimulants or complicated protocols. You see, your ability to focus doesn't just depend on what you're doing, but when you're doing it. Energy is your most valuable asset, and if you deploy it without strategy, you're burning jet fuel on a lawnmower. Most people approach their day like they have unlimited energy. They check emails first thing in the morning, jump between random tasks, and wonder why they feel mentally exhausted by 2 p.m., even though they haven't accomplished anything meaningful. But your brain operates on predictable energy cycles. In fact, there are specific windows when your cognitive capacity is at its peak and other times when it naturally dips. The key is working with those rhythms instead of fighting against them. And what if I told you that there is a 90-minute window in your day where your brain is twice as powerful, and yet most people waste it checking their email? You see, most people think that they should start working the moment they wake up, or they try to copy someone else's 4 a.m. routine without understanding how their own brain actually functions. But did you know that your brain doesn't just turn on when you open your eyes in the morning? There is actually a complex neurochemical process that happens every morning and determines when you'll be at peak performance. When you wake up, your brain is still flooded with a chemical called adenosine, something that naturally makes you feel tired. And it takes about 90 minutes for this chemical to clear out of your system naturally. At the same time, your cortisol levels are gradually rising throughout the morning, reaching their peak typically about 2 to 3 hours after waking up. Now, cortisol gets a bad reputation, but it's actually your brain's performance enhancer, your brain's natural coffee, so to say. When cortisol peaks, it increases alertness, sharpens focus, and primes your prefrontal cortex for complex thinking. This is your neurochemical sweet spot. Andrew Huberman's research at Stanford demonstrates that cortisol release follows a predictable pattern, with the steepest rise occurring 2 to 3 hours after waking. This cortisol awakening response is directly linked to your cognitive performance, attention, and working memory capacity. But most people completely ignore this. They either jump straight into work while their brain is still groggy with adenosine, or they waste their cortisol peaks on emails and busy work. And then they wonder why they feel mentally exhausted by afternoon. But as the day progresses, this neurochemical balance naturally shifts. Your cortisol levels drop, melatonin production begins to increase, and adenosine starts building up again. Pretty much your brain is preparing for rest and recovery. So instead of fighting this natural decline with more caffeine or trying to push through 12-hour workdays, instead you work with your brain's chemistry. You implement something called circadian work schedule, which means you schedule your most cognitively demanding work during your cortisol peak, which is in the first 8 hours of the day, and allow yourself to wind down as your neurochemicals shift more towards rest and recovery mode. As a result, you'll feel sharp and energized during your peak hours instead of constantly battling brain fog. And you'll actually be able to relax in the evening instead of feeling wired but tired. But even if you time your work perfectly, chances are you're still wasting your peak brain power on the wrong type of tasks. The wrong type of tasks are what most people fill their peak brain hours with: emails, meetings, admin work, and random busy tasks that feel productive but don't actually move the needle forward. When your focus neurochemicals are at their peak and your brain is primed for maximum focus, your brain is essentially full of something that I call focus juice. Think about it like your brain's most valuable resource. And the thing is that most people waste their focus juice on low value activities. Think about it. You have maybe about 2 to 4 hours a day when your brain is operating at full capacity. If you spend that precious time responding to emails or sitting at pointless meetings, you're essentially using premium fuel to do basic tasks. Every choice you make, every piece of information you process, every distraction you engage in depletes your focus juice. Deep work requires intense focus, complex thinking, and creativity. Writing, strategizing, problem solving. Busy work, on the other hand, is admin tasks that need to get done but don't require your peak focus capacity. You're essentially able to do them eyes closed. So what you need to do here is to leverage your brain's focus juice for the things that move the needle forward the most. During your cortisol peak, you do deep work in 90-minute focus blocks with 0 distractions. Now, you save emails, calls, and other admin tasks for when your energy naturally dips. And instead of feeling like you worked all day but you accomplished nothing meaningful, you'll make significant progress on your most important projects. You'll get more done in 2 hours of peak focus than what most people accomplish in an entire day. But knowing when to do something isn't enough if you don't have a systematic way to implement it. Without a systematic approach, you'll still end up defaulting to whatever feels most urgent or easy in the moment. Most people just wake up and react to whatever is in front of them. Emails, messages, or just any task that pops up. It's like going into battle without knowing your target. You end up shooting in all directions, wasting valuable ammo, and never making real progress on what actually matters. Before any successful attack, you need to know exactly what to attack and when to attack it. So when it's time to work, when it's time to go to war, you should know exactly what to focus on so you don't spend mental energy deciding in the moment. Your brain needs a predetermined plan that removes decision making out of the equation. Because when you have to decide what to work on in real time, you're already depleting mental energy before you even start working. You need to start thinking like a general thinks before going to war and set up what I call your war plan. To do this, you need to use a brain dump system while you're working throughout the day. Every task, idea, or random thought that popped into your head while you're doing work gets immediately caught in one centralized inbox, something like Asana, Todoist, or simply your notes. And at the end of each workday, you sort everything based on deadline and category. You categorize each task as either deep work or admin work based on the principles we just covered. Deep work gets scheduled during your cortisol peak in the first 5 to 8 hours of your day, and admin work gets batched for your natural energy dips for later in the day. That way, when you wake up and it's time to attack, you know exactly what to focus on. No decision making and no mental energy spent on planning. You just execute on the war plan you created when your brain was fresh. So instead of constantly making micro decisions on what to work on next, you'll now operate on autopilot. Your energy will now go towards executing the work and not figuring out what the work should be. Your energy is now optimized, but if your body's stress systems are overloaded, no amount of planning will ever save you. You see, your body has a limited capacity to handle stress, and most people are constantly operating at their breaking point without even realizing it. This is called allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear in your body from chronic stress. When your allostatic load is too high, your brain simply can't function optimally no matter how good your work schedule is. You'll feel foggy, exhausted, and unable to think clearly even when you're doing everything else right. Because brain fog isn't just about the work habits, it's often a symptom of an overloaded nervous system that's been running on stress hormones for too long. The foundation of everything starts with something that happens while you're unconscious. What happens while you're unconscious is the most critical factor of eliminating brain fog, but most people treat it like it's optional or something they can take care of or optimize later. I'm talking about sleep. Sleep is literally when your brain performs essential maintenance that directly impacts your cognitive function the next day. When this process is disrupted, you wake up with mental fog that no amount of caffeine or willpower can fix. During sleep, 3 critical things happen that determine whether you'll wake up feeling sharp or foggy. First, your brain restores neurotransmitter sensitivity. Throughout the day, your dopamine, serotonin, and other neurotransmitter receptors become less sensitive from constant use. But sleep resets these receptors back to baseline, which is why you can think clearly in the morning again. Second, your cortisol levels reset to their natural rhythm. Remember, cortisol is your brain's natural energy enhancer, but it needs to drop at night and rise in the morning in a predictable pattern. When you don't sleep well, this rhythm gets disrupted, leaving leaving you foggy when you should be sharp. And third, your brain activates something called the glymphatic system, essentially your brain's cleaning crew. This system flushes out toxic proteins and metabolic waste that accumulates naturally throughout the day. Matthew Walker's research in Why We Sleep shows that this process only happens during the phase of deep sleep. And the kicker is that most people sabotage all of these three processes without even realizing it. They go to bed at different times every night, expose themselves to bright light before sleep, or drink coffee at 3 p.m. thinking it won't affect them. Research shows that when people went to bed after 4 a.m., their cognitive processing speed dropped significantly the next day. Another study showed that people with irregular sleep and wake patterns performed worse on executive function and working memory tasks, which essentially are the same mental systems responsible for decision making, focus, and problem solving. Another study showed that college students with irregular sleep schedules scored 15% lower on working memory tests, and their GPA was 0.3 points lower than those who kept regular sleep times. What you need to do is to have sleep optimization as a non-negotiable foundation. And to do this, you need to implement 3 specific protocols. First, consistent sleep and wake times within 30 minutes, give or take, every day, even on weekends. This trains your circadian rhythm to expect sleep and wake at predictable times. Second, you need to control evening light exposure. A controlled study found that exposure of just 30 lux of room light in the evening, which is about the same brightness of a bedside lamp, suppressed melatonin by 50%. Another study showed that using a tablet for 2 hours at night dropped melatonin levels by 55% and delayed the brain's natural sleep onset by an hour and a half. The third protocol is that you need to cut caffeine about 10 hours before bedtime. A sleep study found that caffeine consumed even 8 hours before bedtime still reduced total sleep time by 45 minutes. It also reduced sleep efficiency by 7% and also made it take 9 minutes longer to fall asleep. When consumed just 4 hours before sleep, it reduced sleep quality by 34%. Now, as a result of implementing these 3 protocols, instead of waking up feeling exhausted and needing another 30 minutes just to feel human, you'll wake up with immediate mental clarity. Your neurotransmitters will be reset, your cortisol rhythm will be optimized, and your brain will be clean from the overnight maintenance. But look, even perfect sleep won't help you if your cardiovascular system can't deliver nutrients and oxygen to your brain. Here's what I mean. What's happening when you're spending your entire day sitting is your cardiovascular system becomes sluggish and inefficient. Most people don't realize that your brain is completely dependent on your heart and blood vessels to deliver the oxygen and nutrients it needs to think clearly. When your lifestyle is sedentary, your heart doesn't have to work hard, your blood flow slows down, and your cardiovascular system essentially gets lazy. It's like a delivery truck that moves slower and slower each day. Eventually, your brain stops getting the supplies it needs when it needs them. You see, your brain consumes about 20% of your body's total energy. But the thing is that it doesn't have its own energy storage. It depends entirely on your cardiovascular system to constantly deliver oxygen and glucose. And when that delivery system is weak from lack of use, your brain operates like a high-performance computer on a dying battery. A long-term study found that adults with higher cardiovascular fitness during midlife had significantly better cognitive performance about 25 years later, including things like attention, memory, and processing speed. Another study showed that older adults with poor fitness had slower reaction times and reduced working memory capacity compared to those with high levels of cardiorespiratory fitness. But there's another mechanism at play. When you exercise, your brain releases something called BDNF, which is essentially like a fertilizer for your brain cells. BDNF promotes new neural connections and protects existing ones from damage. Research shows that just one session of moderate exercise increased BDNF levels by up to 30%. And in another study, BDNF levels increased 2 to 3 times after aerobic exercise, and that increase was directly linked to improvements in short-term memory and processing speed. You need to implement what I call physical activity and cardio buffering. To do this, you need to implement 150 minutes of zone 2 cardio per week. Things like brisk walk, swimming, or cycling, or any activity that elevates your heart rate in zone 2. On top of that, you also include about 2 to 3 sessions of strength training to support overall metabolic health and longevity. The key here is consistency over intensity. A 20-minute walk every day is way more valuable than one intense workout just once a week. And tons of studies prove prove this. Moderate physical activity done regularly was associated with significantly higher cognitive scores, while intense, less frequent workouts did not show the same effect. One study found that even 3 10-minute moderate sessions per day gave the same cognitive boost as longer workouts. So when you do this, instead of your brain feeling suffocated and sluggish from sitting all day, you'll have sharp and sustained mental energy. But all of this falls apart if your nervous system is stuck in chronic fight or flight mode, like most entrepreneurs. What's happening when you're stuck in chronic fight or flight is that your nervous system can't distinguish between real emergency and everyday work stress. Your body essentially treats a difficult email the same way it would treat a lion chasing you. Your nervous system has 2 modes: sympathetic, which means fight or flight, and parasympathetic, which means rest and digest. Most entrepreneurs are stuck in sympathetic overdrive from constant stimulation, notifications, deadlines, stimulants, and information overload. When you're chronically stressed, your body produces cortisol and adrenaline continuously. While these hormones are useful in short bursts for peak performance, chronic elevation creates brain fog, impairs memory formation, and makes it impossible for you to think clearly. High cortisol from constant stress isn't just uncomfortable, it measurably drags down your brain. Elevated evening cortisol has been tied to slower reaction times and worse verbal memory. In women, higher cortisol excretion predicted steeper memory decline over time. When stress happens just before you try to remember something important, recall performance drops significantly. But there's another thing that a lot of people don't understand. Your ability to shift from fight or flight mode to rest and digest mode is actually trainable. It's controlled by something called your vagus nerve, and you can simply strengthen it like a muscle. As a matter of fact, studies show that stimulating the vagus nerve can boost executive attention and lower the stress system load. A controlled trial found that vagus nerve stimulation improved executive attention and multitasking cognitive performance, even in sleep-deprived adults. But the problem is that most people never actually train their parasympathetic nervous system. They just hope stress will just go away on its own, but the reality is that without deliberate practice, your nervous system simply stays stuck in high alert mode. You need to implement what I call stress regulation and parasympathetic training, meaning you actively train your nervous system to shift into rest and digest mode through specific breathing techniques, meditation, or other parasympathetic activators. One of the simplest methods is box breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, and you want to do this for about 5 to 20 minutes a day to train your vagus nerve and improve your ability to down-regulate stress. Second, you want to do frequent cold exposure through cold showers or ice baths. Start with simply 30 seconds of cold water at the end of your showers and gradually increase it to the point where you're doing about 15 minutes of cold exposure total per week. Cold exposure activates your parasympathetic nervous system and builds stress resilience to keep you calm and collected under high stress situations. And third, a daily meditation practice. Even 10 minutes of mindfulness meditation helps train your brain to observe stress without getting caught up in it, strengthening your ability to, again, stay calm under high pressure. And as a result, instead of feeling wired and anxious all day with your brain stuck in survival mode, you'll feel calmer and more centered. Your brain will be able to access higher level thinking instead of being trapped in reactive fight or flight responses. Mental clarity will become your default state instead of something you have to constantly fight for. And now that you know how to eliminate brain fog forever, you also need to learn how to turn this mental clarity into an unfair competitive advantage so you can stay focused all day like a superhuman. And there is a specific protocol I've started using recently that combines these brain optimization strategies with focus techniques to create what I call superhuman cognitive performance. So watch this video here where I show you what it is, how it works, and how you can use it to outthink and outwork 99% of entrepreneurs while feeling sharp and energized all day long.